Picture graduation day. Your child is walking across the stage. They have their cap and gown on. Maybe they have honor cords around their neck. Maybe they're under scholarship, or better yet, multiple scholarships. Maybe they already have an acceptance letter from college, a training program, the military, or whatever pathway they decided to pursue next. The family is proud. Everybody's taking pictures. You're celebrating everything that young person has accomplished. And you should. Graduation matters, and all of their academic achievements matter as well. Completing school is something worth celebrating. But I want you to think about what happens after the pictures are taken and the celebration is over. Can that same graduate manage their own time without somebody constantly reminding them what they're supposed to be doing next? Can they manage their own money? Can they communicate with a professor, an employer, a supervisor, or another adult when there's a problem? And when they make a mistake, can they figure out how to respond when nobody gives them a rubric telling them exactly what to do next? That's not me minimizing education. It's actually the opposite. I believe education should help prepare young people for what comes next. Graduation shouldn't be the day we suddenly expect young people to know how adulthood works. So when should preparation actually begin? That's exactly what we're getting into in today's episode. Welcome to Raising Scholars, a podcast dedicated to developing scholars by building discipline, habits, skills, and lifelong growth. We define a scholar as someone who is actively trying to grow by educating themselves and developing the habits, discipline, and skills needed for life. I'm Terrell, and in today's episode, we're talking about preparing children for adulthood, not just school. And I want to focus on one part of the scholar definition today. The last part, skills needed for life. In our first episode, we talked about what it means to be a scholar. And last episode, we introduced the 6 pillars that help us develop the whole scholar. Now we have to ask, what are all of these habits, skills, and areas of development actually preparing young people to do? Because the goal is not simply to raise children who can succeed in school. The goal is to use education, family structure, responsibility, mentorship, and real-life practice to develop young people. By doing this, we increase the likelihood that they'll be able to manage themselves, make wise decisions, and handle responsibilities. And we give them a stronger foundation to continue learning as they navigate through adulthood. The first main idea is this: school matters, but school is not the finish line. And I want to start by making that clear, because sometimes when people hear somebody talk about real life skills, the conversation immediately turns to, well, schools don't teach real life. That's not the argument I'm making. School is one of the major training grounds for life. Think about what students practice in school. They learn how to read, write, research, solve problems, work with other people, meet deadlines, receive feedback, and continue working when something is difficult. Those aren't just school skills. Those are life skills. School also provides credentials and opens doors to opportunities. So, grades matter, as well as graduation, and academic learning as a whole matters. But here's the difference. School often provides a lot of external structure. There's a schedule, there's a teacher, there's usually some type of deadline. There may be a rubric showing exactly what's expected. There's usually somebody telling you what assignment is next and when it needs to be completed. Adulthood does not work like that. Sometimes a boss gives you an outcome and expects you to figure out how to get there. Bill still has a due date whether somebody reminds you or not. A relationship problem doesn't come with a rubric explaining exactly how to resolve it. And sometimes you're going to make a mistake, and there's no teacher there saying, okay, let's go back to number 5. What happens when nobody gives you a rubric? That's where life readiness begins to matter. As an educator, I've seen capable students who can complete difficult academic work but still depend heavily on adults for reminders, communication, planning, and ordinary problem solving. And I don't say that to shame those students. If a young person has never had an opportunity to practice something, we shouldn't be surprised that they aren't automatically good at it. The better question is, Where can safe ownership begin shifting? School success is an achievement. Life readiness is a continuing development process. The second main idea is this: adulthood skills must be practiced before adulthood. If we want young people to handle adulthood well, then they need opportunities to practice adulthood skills before adulthood actually comes. Nobody turns 18 and suddenly downloads time management, communication, financial judgment, self-advocacy, or decision-making into their brain overnight. Those things develop through practice. And the best time to practice many of them is before the consequences become serious. Think about time management. If a teenager has always depended on a parent saying, "Wake up, get dressed, get your backpack, you're going to be late. Did you do your homework?" Then the first day of college, military training, trade school, or a full-time job probably shouldn't be the first day we expect them to manage an entire schedule by themselves. That doesn't mean a 7-year-old should be managing a household calendar independently. It means responsibilities should grow over time. The same thing applies to communication. Young people need opportunities to ask their own questions. They need to learn how to write an appropriate email, make a phone call, explain a problem, ask for clarification, and respectfully advocate for themselves. If a student has a problem with a teacher, the parent may need to be involved. But depending on the age, situation, and stakes, that doesn't always mean the parent needs to immediately take over the conversation. Maybe the young person can begin learning how to speak for themselves. Money works the same way. A young person can begin learning how to track what they spend, save toward a goal, compare prices, understand a basic budget, and eventually learn about banking, credit, debt, and investing. The amount of the responsibility should match the young person. Health is another example. As children get older, they can begin participating more in their appointments. Maybe they learn some of their basic health information. Maybe they start answering questions directly instead of always looking at the parent first. Maybe they learn which questions they should ask. That doesn't mean parents suddenly disappear from medical decisions. Some responsibilities are high stakes, and adult involvement remains necessary. That's the balance we have to figure out. There's no universal age where every child should be doing the exact same thing. Readiness depends on the person. It depends on the task. It depends on disability, neurodivergence, prior experience, safety, family circumstances, and how serious the consequences may be. But the larger principle remains. Practice should begin before the stakes become high. We can't hold young people accountable for skills we never took the time to teach them. So, if responsibility shouldn't suddenly appear in adulthood, then how do we actually transfer it? That brings us to the third main idea, and probably the most important part of this episode. The third main idea is this: responsibility should be gradually transferred. And this is where I want to introduce a Raising Scholars framework that I think parents, educators, mentors, and scholars can use over and over again. It's called the progressive responsibility model. The sequence is model, teach, guide, monitor, own, contribute. Again, that's model, teach, guide, monitor, own, and contribute. The ideas behind this framework are informed by established concepts like scaffolding, gradual release of responsibility, and research around developing autonomy and agency. But this exact 6-stage sequence is a Raising Scholars teaching framework. I'm not saying that somebody ran a study and proved that these 6 stages are the only way to develop responsibility. This is our practical way of taking those broader development principles and putting them into something families and educators can actually use. So let's break it down. The first stage is model. The question here is, has the young person actually seen the responsibility performed well? Sometimes adults expect young people to know how to do something because they've watched us do it. But watching somebody do something isn't always the same as understanding what they're doing. Let's say you're teaching a young person how to manage a calendar. You could simply put an appointment into the calendar yourself, or you can make your thinking visible. You could say, this appointment is at 3:30, so I'm putting it into the calendar right now. I'm also setting a reminder because I don't want to rely on my memory alone. I know it takes about 20 minutes to get there, so I need to account for that too. Now the scholar isn't just seeing you use a calendar. They're learning how you think through the process. That's modeling. The same thing applies to money. If children only see a card get swiped, they may never see the decision-making behind the purchase. Sometimes we have to make that invisible thinking actually visible. Why are we choosing this particular product? Why aren't we buying something else? Why are we waiting to buy it? Why are we saving? Why are we comparing prices? Modeling allows the scholar to see what competent behavior looks like. The second stage is and the question becomes, have we actually explained how to do it? This is where adults sometimes skip a step. We say, email your teacher. Okay. Does the scholar know what an appropriate email looks like? Do they know how to start it? Do they know how to explain the problem clearly? Do they understand the difference between asking for help and demanding for something? Do they know how to close the message? If not, then we have to teach it. We explain the steps. We explain the standard. We explain why it matters. And we explain common mistakes. We can't hold young people accountable for skills we never took the time to teach. If we want them to manage money, somebody has to teach budgeting. If we want them to communicate professionally, somebody has to teach communication. If we want them to manage time, somebody has to teach them how to use systems instead of just saying, just remember. If we want them to take responsibility, we have to teach them what responsibility actually looks like. The third stage is guide. Now the scholar begins performing the responsibility. The adult is still there, but the adult isn't doing all the work. This is where coaching happens. Let's go back to the email example. Instead of the parent writing the email to the teacher, maybe the scholar writes it. The parent can say, okay, tell me what happened. What do you need to communicate? What are you asking the teacher for? The scholar drafts the message. The parent may look at it and say, okay, this part needs to be clearer. Make sure you greet the teacher. Or you may want to take this sentence out because it sounds disrespectful, even if that wasn't your intention. But the scholar is doing the work. That's guidance. The adult is supporting without taking over. Guidance is different from takeover. And the goal for guidance is to eventually need less of it. The fourth stage is monitor. Now the scholar takes the lead and the adult steps back. The adult is still paying attention, but the scholar is primarily responsible for completing the task. Think about a morning routine. When children are young, a parent may be involved in almost every single step. Wake up, get dressed, brush your teeth, get your backpack on, wear your shoes, let's go. As the child gets older, that should begin changing. Maybe now the scholar sets an alarm. Maybe they prepare clothes and materials the night before. Maybe they have a checklist. Maybe they know what time they need to leave. The parent can still check in. You can ask a question like, were you ready on time? But the parent is no longer providing 10 separate instructions every morning. That's monitoring. The scholar is leading. The adult is checking the outcome. And this part is important. If the scholar makes one manageable mistake, that doesn't automatically mean the adult needs to take the whole responsibility back. Maybe they oversleep one morning. Maybe they forget something. Maybe the system doesn't work the first time. The mistake gives us information. Was the skill actually taught? Does the routine need to change? Does the scholar need another guided attempt? Was the responsibility too advanced? Or do they just simply need another opportunity to practice? Mistakes are a part of the development. The fifth stage is own. At this point, the responsibility primarily belongs to the scholar. They manage it from beginning to end. Maybe it's managing their own calendar. or communicating directly about an ordinary school issue. Maybe it's tracking a personal spending budget or preparing their own materials. They could also be completing household responsibilities. Or maybe they're researching their own college, military, certification, or career options. The adult may still be available, but the adult doesn't need to initiate, supervise, or control every step. And this is important. Ownership doesn't mean never ask for help again. That's not adulthood. Adults ask for help all the time. We talk to accountants, doctors, mechanics, teachers, lawyers, mentors, supervisors, financial professionals, and other experts. Ownership means this responsibility primarily belongs to me, and I know when I need help, and I know how to seek it. The sixth stage is contribute. And this is where I think the Raising Scholars framework goes beyond simply saying you need to become independent. Because maturity isn't only about becoming capable enough to take care of yourself. Eventually, we should become capable enough to contribute to other people too. An older sibling who has mastered a routine can help a younger sibling. A strong student can mentor another student. A young adult who has learned financial responsibility can contribute appropriately to the household. An experienced employee can help train somebody new. A scholar can use what they've learned to help their family, team, school, workplace, or community. Maturity isn't only learning how to carry your own weight. Eventually, you should become capable of carrying something for somebody else as well. And that's the full progression. Model, teach, guide, monitor, own, and contribute. And I want to keep one question in your mind throughout the rest of the episode. Who is doing the responsibility right now, and who needs to eventually own it? Okay, let's make this practical. Take teacher communication. Maybe right now a parent handles every communication with the school. The next step doesn't have to be, okay, you're on your own. Maybe the parent models the communication, then teaches the structure, then helps the scholar draft the message. Then the scholar sends the message while the parent monitors. Eventually, the scholar owns ordinary academic communication. Same thing with the morning routine. Maybe the parent is currently managing every step. The next stage could be helping the scholar build their own system, an alarm, a checklist, preparing the night before. Then the parent monitors instead of constantly reminding. Same way for money. Maybe the adult currently decides everything. Over time, the young person can begin managing a small amount of money. They can learn to budget. They can save towards something that they want. They can compare prices. And yeah, they can make a poor, low-stakes decision and then learn from it. You'd rather somebody learn a lesson from mishandling $20 while they're young than learn that same lesson with rent money, a credit card, or a car payment later. That's the point. We practice responsibility while the stakes are still manageable. And every time we can ask, who is doing the responsibility right now and who needs to eventually own it? Now, I want to speak directly to the parents for a minute. Most parents who do a lot for their children aren't trying to hurt their development. They're trying to help. You want to protect your child. You don't want them embarrassed. You don't want them to fail. Sometimes you're tired, and it's simply faster to do it yourself. I understand all of that. The question isn't whether you care too much. The question is whether the support is still helping the child develop. Support becomes a problem when the adult constantly carries a responsibility the young person is ready to begin practicing. And the answer isn't, fine, figure everything out yourself. That's not what I'm saying either. The answer is better calibrated support. Maybe your child still needs you to model. Maybe they need you to teach. Maybe they're ready for guidance. Maybe they're already capable, and you just need to monitor. The amount of support should change as capability changes. And there are absolutely situations where adult involvement needs to remain strong. Medical safety, legal issues, major financial decisions, violence, harassment, serious power imbalances. High-stakes situations are different. We don't use the progressive responsibility model as an excuse to abandon children to consequences they aren't developmentally or legally prepared to handle. The goal isn't withdrawal. The goal is development. And when development is happening well, something else starts to happen. The 6 pillars we talked about in episode 2 began turning into adult competencies. The 4th main idea is this: the 6 pillars become adult competencies. Let's walk through them briefly. Pillar 1 is discipline, habits, and mindset. As an adult, that becomes things like showing up on time, following through, managing your schedule, staying consistent, controlling impulses, and recovering when something doesn't go your way. Nobody should have to constantly chase a grown adult to make them responsible for their own commitments. Pillar 2 is academic success and learning skills. As an adult, that becomes reading instructions, researching, writing clearly, learning new technology, solving problems, responding to feedback, and continuing to educate yourself. Formal schooling may eventually end. Learning cannot. Pillar 3 is health, wellness, and performance. As an adult, you increasingly become responsible for your own routines, sleep, stress management, movement, health decisions, and knowing when you need professional support. Pillar 4 is leadership, character, and purpose. That becomes integrity, accountability, communication, relationships, conflict resolution, service, reputation, leadership, and having some sense of direction for how you want to use your life. Pillar 5 is financial literacy and life readiness. That becomes budgeting, paying bills, banking, managing credit and debt, saving, investing, understanding taxes and insurance, transportation, housing, and making everyday financial decisions. And Pillar 6 is pathways and opportunities. That becomes making decisions about education, employment, military service, certifications, apprenticeships, networking, entrepreneurship, and even changing careers later in life. The 6 pillars aren't just categories for childhood development. They eventually become adult responsibilities. And notice something. Adults don't stop using these pillars. You may be 40 years old and still improving your discipline. You may need to learn a new skill for work. You may have to adjust your health habits. You may be rethinking your purpose. You may be improving your finances. You may be changing careers. That's why we talk about lifelong growth. Scholar development doesn't end at graduation, no matter what school we're talking about. The 5th and final main idea is this: preparation is shared work, but ownership must increasingly shift to the scholar. Preparing a young person for adulthood is shared work. Parents have a role, educators have a role, mentors have a role, and the scholar has a role. Parents provide structure, expectations, modeling, boundaries, practice, and support. But as a young person develops, the parent's role should begin changing. Educators provide knowledge, academic rigor, thinking skills, feedback, communication practice, and opportunities to revise and improve. One question I think educators should regularly ask is, what am I teaching that students will still need when nobody is giving them a grade? A deadline can teach reliability. Research can teach informed decision-making. An email can teach professional communication. Revision can teach someone how to respond to feedback. Group work can teach collaboration. Planning can teach time management. Mentors can provide perspective, exposure, accountability, networks, and examples of how adults make decisions. But mentors shouldn't only talk about adulthood. When possible, let the scholar participate. And then there's the scholar. As they grow, they have to increase their ownership, effort, communication, reflection, decision-making, help-seeking, follow-through, and correction when they make mistakes. The goal isn't permanent dependence, but the goal also isn't forced isolation. The mature endpoint is interdependence. A capable adult can say, this is my responsibility. And they can also say, I need help with this and I know where to go. Independence doesn't mean doing everything alone. Maturity means knowing what belongs to you and knowing when you need support. For parents, I want you to ask yourself one question. What am I doing for my child that they're ready to begin learning? Pick one responsibility, not 10. One. Then ask, are they ready for guidance? Can I step back and monitor? Are they ready to own it? Or have they reached the point where they can contribute and help somebody else? Once you figure that out, then move one stage forward. You don't have to jump from model to own overnight. That defeats the entire idea. The goal is gradual transfer. For the scholars listening, ask yourself, what is one thing somebody regularly does for me that I'm ready to begin learning to do? Maybe somebody manages your schedule. Maybe they communicate for you. Maybe they handle your money. Maybe they keep reminding you about the same responsibility over and over again. Maybe they're doing all of the research about the future while you're barely participating. Pick one thing, then ask to be taught. Practice, use a system, ask questions, and begin taking greater ownership. Growing independence doesn't mean you stop asking for help. It means you become more responsible for knowing when help is needed. For educators, choose one thing you already require students to do and explain the adult life purpose behind it. If you enforce deadlines, connect that to reliability. If you're teaching research, connect it to making informed decisions. If students are writing emails, connect that to professional communication. If you're asking them to revise their work, connect that to how adults use feedback. Students are more likely to understand the value of a skill when they can see where it goes beyond the classroom. For mentors, teach one practical adult skill, but don't stop at showing it. Let the scholar participate. If you're teaching networking, let them introduce themselves. If you're teaching budgeting, let them build part of the budget. If you're discussing career planning, let them do some of the research. The goal is participation. Okay, everyone. For the next 7 days, I want you to complete the One Step Toward Ownership challenge. Choose one responsibility, then identify the current stage. Model, teach, guide, mentor, own, contribute. Ask yourself, where is the responsibility right now? And what's the next reasonable step? Then practice moving one stage forward. That's it. One responsibility, one stage, one step. The goal isn't immediate independence. The goal is increased capability. Before we close, let's review the 5 main ideas. First, school matters, but school is not the finish line. Second, adulthood skills must be practiced before adulthood. Third, responsibility should be gradually transferred. And remember the progressive responsibility model. Model, teach, guide, monitor, own, contribute. Fourth, the 6 pillars become adult competencies. And fifth, preparation is shared work, but ownership must increasingly shift to the scholar. Now let's go back to our definition. A scholar is someone who is actively trying to grow by educating themselves and developing the habits, discipline, and skills needed for life. That last part really matters right now. Needed for life. Because the goal of raising a scholar isn't simply helping a young person get through school. It's preparing them to keep learning, growing, deciding, contributing, and taking responsibility long after school is over. The goal of raising a scholar is not to make childhood harder. It's to make adulthood more manageable because preparation began early. Every responsibility we teach before it becomes an emergency gives a young person another tool for life. So as you leave this episode, ask yourself one more time, who is doing the responsibility right now and who needs to eventually own it? On the next episode, we're going to talk about how back to school starts at home. We'll look at how habits, routines, expectations, and discipline established at home can help scholars prepare for a stronger start to the school year. Until then, don't forget to complete the One Step Toward Ownership Challenge and identify one responsibility that can move one stage closer to ownership. If you found value in this episode, please like, follow, and rate the show. You can also write a review and share this episode with a parent, scholar, educator, mentor, coach, counselor, or somebody else who could benefit from this conversation. All right, I'll see y'all in the next episode. Until then, keep raising them.